At Thanksgiving dinner, my dad told me, "Go live in the streets." He didn't know I earned $25 million a year, so I just smiled and walked away. 3 weeks later, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The dining room in our drafty Chicago Victorian was freezing, but my father's voice was absolute zero. Richard didn't whisper. He looked me dead in the eye, surrounded by fine china and family, and delivered his verdict. "Jasmine, if you can't get your life together, maybe you belong in a shelter." My mother, Patricia, adjusted her pearls. My sister, Alyssa, smirked behind her wine glass. They waited for me to beg. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my coat, and walked out into the snow. They thought they were evicting a failure. They had no idea they just declared war on a ghost. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the silence in my penthouse wasn't lonely. It was expensive. From the 45th floor, the Chicago skyline looked like a circuit board of gold and steel pulsing against the freezing darkness of Lake Michigan. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass sipping tea that cost more per ounce than the wine my sister Alyssa had been drinking while she laughed at my expense. My parents, Richard and Patricia, loved to tell a very specific story about me. In their version, I was Jasmine the Drifter, the one who dropped out of their approved career path to play with computers. To them, my silence at dinner was proof of my defeat. They thought I didn't speak because I was broken. They didn't understand that I didn't speak because I was calculating. There is a specific kind of power in indifference. In modern business, we call it leverage. When you know you hold the winning hand, you don't need to flip the table. You don't need to scream or defend your dignity. You just wait. My lack of reaction wasn't weakness. It was the supreme confidence of a CEO who knows the Q4 projections before the board meeting even starts. I walked to my desk, a slab of imported black marble that floated in the center of the room, and woke up my monitors. The screens flooded the room with blue light, displaying the dashboard of my company, AI Logistics. While my father was busy telling the extended family I was one step away from a homeless shelter, my algorithms were currently rerouting global shipping lanes for 3 of the largest retailers on the planet. I logged into my personal banking portal. The numbers refreshed instantly. Last year, my adjusted gross income wasn't just $25 million. After the fourth quarter bonuses and stock options vested, it was closer to $30 million. It wasn't just money. It was a wall of no that I could put between myself and anyone who tried to control me. My sister Alyssa liked to call herself an artistic genius. She ran the Gilded Frame, a gallery in a trendy district that my parents bragged about constantly. I clicked open a separate tab, pulling up the public records for commercial properties in her district. I knew the gallery's foot traffic was down 40%. I knew the building needed structural repairs. I knew the illusion of success they projected was operating on a deficit. My phone buzzed on the marble surface. It was a text from my cousin Ashley. "Your mom is at church group," the message read. "She's asking for prayers. She told them you're mentally unstable and sleeping on friends' couches. She's setting up a narrative, Jasmine." I didn't feel angry. Anger implies surprise, and I wasn't surprised. This was their playbook. If I wasn't the failure they claimed I was, then their treatment of me was unjustified. So, to protect their own egos, they had to rewrite reality. They had to make me the tragedy. I typed back a single word, "Let her." The wind in Chicago doesn't just blow, it bites. It scrapes against the glass of my living room windows, a constant low-frequency hum that reminds you exactly how thin the line is between comfort and survival. 3 days had passed since the Thanksgiving dinner, and the temperature outside had dropped 20 degrees. Inside my family's narrative, however, the heat was just starting to rise. I was sitting at my kitchen island when my phone lit up again. Ashley sent a screenshot from my mother's private Facebook group. The caption read, "Please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult season. Our eldest daughter Jasmine is struggling with severe instability and housing insecurity. We are doing everything we can to support her from a distance, but sometimes tough love is the only way to help a lost soul find their footing." I zoomed in on the image. It was an old photo of me from college, looking tired during finals week. They had weaponized my worst angle to sell their lie. Housing insecurity. I looked around my 3,000 square foot condo. I looked at the heated floors. I looked at the deed in my safe. If I was unstable, then their cruelty became tough love. They were the heroes of a tragedy they had invented. I swiped out of the text and opened Instagram to check on Alyssa. She had posted 10 minutes ago a photo of her standing in the Gilded Frame holding champagne. The caption read, "Artistic genius requires sacrifice. So proud of the new collection. Culture is the heartbeat of this city, and I am honored to be its guardian." It was a beautiful picture. It was also a complete fabrication. Because I had access to the data I knew, the Gilded Frame had been served with 2 separate notices for unpaid utility bills in the last 6 months. Alyssa was playing dress-up in a burning house, and my parents were fanning the flames while telling the neighbors to look at the pretty smoke. The following Monday began like any other in the high-stakes world of logistics, except for the email waiting in my inbox. It wasn't from a client. It was from a property management firm I'd never heard of. The subject line read, "Urgent. Notice of default. Commercial lease agreement." I opened it, expecting phishing. Instead, I found a formal letter regarding the Gilded Frame. My eyes scanned the document, my brain struggling to process the words until I hit the phrase that stopped my heart. As the personal guarantor on the lease agreement dated 4 years ago. Personal guarantor. I downloaded the attached PDF, my hand shaking slightly on the mouse. I scrolled to the signature page. And there it was. Jasmine Monroe scrawled in blue ink. It looked like my signature, the loop of the J, the sharp angle of the M, but the pressure was too heavy. The spacing was wrong. It was a masterpiece of betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, the cold light of the monitors washing over me. They hadn't just used me as a punchline. They had used me as an insurance policy. 4 years ago, they needed a co-signer with strong credit for Alyssa's gallery. My father's credit was leveraged to the hilt. So they used me. They used the daughter they called a failure to secure the future of the daughter they called a genius. The total liability was over $580,000. I closed my eyes. This was the scapegoat's utility. In psychology, the scapegoat isn't just the person who gets blamed. They are the vessel for the family's shame. They needed me to be the failure so they could feel successful, but they needed me to be financially viable so they could survive. It was a parasitic paradox. I picked up my phone and dialed Ryan, my corporate attorney. Ryan handled mergers, acquisitions, and the kind of corporate warfare that leaves no bodies, only bankruptcies. "Ryan," I said, "I have a situation, identity theft, forgery, and a commercial lease default. The perpetrators are my parents." After reviewing the files, Ryan's voice was crisp. "Jasmine, we can sue for fraud. It will drag on for years. It will be public." "I know," I said. "I don't want ugly. I want done." "Then we have another option," Ryan said. "The landlord is a REIT based in New York. They're looking to offload distressed assets. I'm suggesting that JLM Holdings, your shell company, makes an offer. Not just for the debt, for the building." The idea bloomed in my mind, cold and perfect. If I sued, I was the victim. If I bought the building, I was the owner. I wouldn't just be fighting them. I would be evicting them from my life using the very bricks and mortar they cherished. "Do it," I said. "Cash. Close in 48 hours. They called it a miracle. My father, Richard, stood in the center of the Gilded Frame, raising a crystal flute to the ceiling, toasting the mysterious benevolence of the universe. I stood on the sidewalk outside, watching through the plate glass window as snow melted against the heated glass. Inside, they looked relieved. They looked triumphant. They looked like people who had dodged a bullet, unaware that they were standing directly in front of a cannon. My phone buzzed. It was Ryan. "The deed is recorded. The transfer is absolute." I pushed open the heavy glass door. The bell chimed, cutting through the conversation. Heads turned. My mother saw me first. Her smile didn't just drop. It evaporated. "Jasmine," she said, her voice pitched loud enough to carry. "What are you doing here? I heard there was a celebration. I didn't want to miss the toast." Alyssa floated over her dress, rustling. "Jasmine, please. We have a very important guest arriving any minute. The angel investor who bought the building is coming to sign the final lease addendum. We really can't have you here bringing the mood down." "Angel investor?" I repeated. "Is that what you're calling JLM Holdings?" Richard stiffened. "How do you know the name of the holding company?" I read. "The public filings," I lied smoothly. "You know I like data." "Well, then you know they saved us," Alyssa snapped. "They bought the building. They bought the debt. Someone saw the value in what I create." "You need to leave," my mother hissed. "Now. Before Mr. O'Connell arrives." "Mr. O'Connell isn't the landlord, Patricia," a voice said from the doorway. We all turned. Ryan stood there, looking every inch the high-powered attorney. My father's face transformed into a sycophantic beam. "Mr. O'Connell, welcome, please come in." Ryan walked past my father, ignoring the outstretched hand, and came to stand directly beside me. "Mr. Monroe," Ryan said, "I am not the owner of JLM Holdings. I am simply the legal counsel. The owner is already here." He turned, slightly gesturing to me with an open palm. "May I introduce you to the sole proprietor of JLM Holdings and the new owner of this building, Jasmine? The silence that followed sucked the air out of the room. I watched the comprehension hit them in waves. "That's not funny," Alyssa whispered. "It's not a joke," I said. "JLM, Jasmine, Louise, Monroe. I bought the debt, Alyssa. I bought the default. And as of 4 in the afternoon today, I own the roof over your head." My father looked at Ryan, desperate. "This is insane. She's homeless. She's unstable." "She is one of the highest paid logistics executives in the country," Ryan corrected. "And she is now your landlord." "You can't do this," Alyssa said, her voice shaking. "We have a lease." "You had a lease," I corrected, walking over to a sculpture that looked cheap up close. "And you defaulted on it. But don't worry. I'm not unreasonable. I'm honoring the lease." My father let out a breath. Thank God. "Jasmine, look, we can work this out." But I interrupted. "Since the personal guarantee was fraudulent, that portion of the contract is void, which means the lease is now unsecured. And as any good landlord knows, an unsecured lease for a tenant with a history of default requires adjustments." Ryan stepped forward, handing a document to my father. "This is a notice of rent adjustment. Effective immediately, the rent is increasing to current market value for this district. Based on recent comps, that's $18,000 a month." "18,000, my mother gasped. "We're paying 6. You were paying 6, I said. "Back when you had a guarantor. Now you don't. You also have outstanding arrears of $48,000, plus legal fees. The total due to cure the default is roughly $65,000. Payable within 7 days." "We don't have $65,000, Alyssa shrieked. "Then you have option 2, I said calmly. "Vacate. Immediately." The room was silent again. I looked at my family, stripped of their pretensions. They were just people who had made bad choices, and were finally paying the bill. "You're evicting us," my father whispered. "Your own family? I'm evicting a tenant who hasn't paid rent in 4 months, I said. "The fact that we share DNA is irrelevant to the contract. You taught me that, remember, business is business." I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I would see. The collapse of an empire built on sand. 7 days later, the gilded frame was empty. I stood in the center of the vacant space, the echo of my footsteps the only sound. The walls were bare. They had taken everything they could carry. I walked to the window and peeled off the vinyl lettering that spelled out the gallery's name. THEGILDEDFRAME. Gone. Ryan met me outside with the keys. "They're out. No damage." "Good," I said. "What are you going to do with the building?" he asked. "Sell it." I looked up at the structure. It was beautiful, really. Red brick, large windows. It deserved better than to be a monument to my sister's ego. "No," I said. "I'm going to keep it. I'm thinking. Tech incubator. A space for young female founders who need a start, people who have the talent but not the backing." Months later, on a quiet winter morning, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. My phone was silent. I had blocked their numbers weeks ago. I didn't know where they were living. I didn't know if Alyssa had found a job. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I took a sip of coffee and looked out at the city. The building I owned was just visible in the distance, a small red brick dot in the sprawling grid. It was full of life now, coders, designers, dreamers. It was real. My family had told me to go live in the streets. They had tried to write me out of their story. But in the end, I hadn't just survived. I had rewritten the ending. I wasn't the homeless daughter. I wasn't the failure. I was the architect of my own life. And the foundation I had built was solid, paid for, and mine.